right. Welcome everybody to our Q&A session about the Confidence Puzzle book. We published the book back in March, and we've had over 25 different parents in our community download the book and read it. And so I'm excited to answer some questions. We've had a whole bunch of questions coming in being submitted this week, and several parents that were not able to make it on the live call, but are looking forward to watching the recording and getting some of their questions answered. So we're going to kind of go through the book chapter by chapter and then read off a few questions that have been submitted kind of around each of those topics. But I'm excited about this as well, part of several reasons, but one aspect for sure is just getting feedback from all of you that have read the book and trying to get your input, your feedback. Definitely answering these questions has brought up a few things. We're getting ready to actually release our second edition already, just over 6 months later after the first edition. And we're actually going to be putting it on Amazon and creating it as a physical book as well. So hopefully we can reach more readers, and really hoping to get this to as many parents as we can and kind of change the culture and expectations for parents with what programs are looking at, evaluating programs as they're having their child try out, and changing the expectations, changing the standards that parents have is really the best leverage we have to really change coaching culture overall. So I'm excited about the momentum we got so far, and excited about getting into a big list of questions tonight. So let's start with the introduction. The title of the book, calling it the Confidence Puzzle, took me a lot of attempts to come up with what to call the actual book. So I've had all kinds of analogies flying around in my head for many years about what's the best way to give people a model, how to explain it the best possible way, so that anybody can understand kind of how we're coming at this idea. And so we talk about the big contrast. Hopefully everybody that's listening to this has had the experience of building a puzzle, and 1,000-piece puzzles, the analogy that we used in the introduction. And if you're building that big puzzle, it's just about 100% certain that you're going to drop a piece or two, maybe on the floor, under your chair, something like that. You might be even working on it over multiple days, and you get to the end, you start to get that feeling of, is there a piece missing? And I think that players really have that similar sensation of, oh my gosh, I'm in the pressure of a game, and I don't know that I have a piece of knowledge or skill or experience that fits this situation, and I'm kind of terrified right now. And so, really the approach that we're taking with training and my whole philosophy of coaching is to try and meet players where they're at and kind of give them that next piece of their puzzle, whatever that looks like, to allow them to step forward. And so I really enjoyed how that came about as we finalized the introduction of the book, and tried to make the case for the fact that players that are not feeling confident are missing some key pieces. And confidence is really just an emergent property of putting all those pieces in place that they need in order to act with certainty. So chapter 1, we get into concrete confidence, talking about the aspects of coaching consistency and decision-making in practice, and then trying to develop that sense of skill certainty. And then we also discussed how reframing mistakes as information, right? Mistakes are not something to be punished. Mistakes are information, feedback that we can use to iterate and modify how we're practicing, and hopefully get over the hump to make it a operable skill. In chapter 2, we talk about the importance of context. And we go through kind of the two main aspects of context that I like to talk about. One is situational context, understanding what game situation this skill is actually going to apply to. And we again use the analogy of the ABCs of writing versus learning grammatical rules of writing. So, players are commonly working on, stationary dribbling skills or 5-player 5-on-0 offense is pattern memorization, and they're always following someone else's script, right? They can recite the ABCs in practice. They can run, they can copy by hand, the equivalent of copying someone else's writing by hand. But what we really want them to learn are the grammatical rules, right? How does sentence structure work? What's a verb and a noun? How can you mix and match this grab bag of pieces and fit them all together? And I really like that analogy for really trying to get players to play more on an improvisational level. I'm a big fan of jazz music. I played jazz trumpet in high school and really fell in love with that freestyle sense of music, where you have pretty narrow rules on how you can structure music, what notes you can play. But then within that, you're allowed the freedom to do absolutely anything you can and adapt to however the mood fits you. And I think basketball is very much the most fun to play when you're in that kind of mode. And so if we can, I guess, get past the sense as coaches that we need to control the situation in order to make it as efficient as possible, allow players to stumble and trip and work out the kinks a little bit, then teaching them on a principle basis, teaching them the equivalent of those rules of grammar allows them to have dramatically better experience and dramatically higher performance as they progress. And then the other aspect of context is the aspirational context. So talking about, what is their biggest dream right now? What are they striving for? What are they excited about and inspired by? And making sure we're connecting what we're doing on the court to that. Like, this is a college player move we're going to work on. Here's what it looks like. Here's the game situation. And we know you want to be a college player. Here's what a college player would be doing in practice. And so a question that comes out of this chapter from what we've heard from parents so far is that they are struggling to assess accurately where their child is, on the spectrum of skill level and ability to perform in games and potential for their future to develop into a better player. Like, how do they figure out where we are, right? The aspirational context is great if we know where we're going, but we got to start from where we are. And it's really hard as a parent to find a way to objectively evaluate that. And so one service that we've developed over the past year is what we call our 360 player assessment, where we're allowing anybody to hire us to come in and develop a snapshot of where the player is. So we use our discovery call with the parent and a separate call with the player. We use a call with their teammates or coaches if they're okay and want us to do that. And then we use a film analysis. So we take a full game film, break it down, watch how they're operating, how they're making decisions, and stat out the whole game, whatever level they're playing at. Before high school, they don't often have any stat categories, so we're able to give them kind of a numerical value of what they're doing in games. And then we also provide our on-court assessment. So we're doing basketball skills in the 6 basic situations that we want to see players in, and we're doing an injury prevention assessment as part of that. So they actually spend a whole hour with us physically. Half of it's basketball, half of it's on the physical examination side to really establish a baseline for where they're at physically as well as skill wise. And then we do a debrief call after we've gathered all that information. We get the parent and player on a call with us and kind of walk through, here's what we've seen, here's all the things we can measure, here's really where you're at. And then we can say, if we know this is where you want to go, we know where you're at, then we can start on the plan to connect those dots. And I think that's really needed. Most programs, most players, most parents' experience is going to be, hey, this team's having a tryout. Let's go see if we can make the team. And, if we make the team and there's an elite label on the team, then we're now an elite player. And if we made a rec team, then we're now a rec player. And it's kind of how we calibrate ourselves for figuring out what level of player we have. And so I think it's really needed and something I really enjoy. It's trying to help players find themselves, and say with certainty, here is where I am currently, here's the pieces that are missing, and here's the next level I want to try and reach. And another question kind of related to that I've had from a few parents is how to gauge the cost benefit analysis for paying for additional training as their child ages. So we'll have players that maybe played some middle school basketball, are now in high school, And especially during COVID, some players either didn't try out or just didn't make their high school team, either their freshman or their sophomore year. And so parents are asking, should I invest in some really intense training to get them up to speed to where, they're going to be confident, they're going to be capable of trying out and hopefully making their high school team? And, where is that threshold? Like if they don't make their high school team this year as a sophomore, should we, invest a whole lot more in a whole another year and try to prep them for the following year? And so, my advice to that question is really to just take it step by step. Like if you didn't make your freshman tryout, then I think there's still value in maybe playing AAU, maybe doing some training, trying to get other competitive experience and leveling up your game to the point where you could make it on a JV team as a sophomore. But after that sophomore year, then I think the probability goes down because a high school coach, by the time you're a sophomore, if you haven't been on the team, he's got a lot of other sophomores that have been on the team, and your chances of either getting on the team or even more importantly, getting any playing time just kind of drops off a cliff. And so I like to say that everybody is going to end up as a recreational player. The question is just a matter of time. And so if we kind of have that framework in mind, then, anytime they want to, they could back off of trying out for the high school team, go play just AAU, go play just rec basketball. If they hit 18, they can go join a men's league and go play, recreationally. And so, trying to constantly recalibrate that, because very few players are going to play in college and hardly any players are going to play professionally. And so, having the aspirational goal is great as we ramp up to try and meet each stage of that we need to get over in order to meet the ultimate dream. But, as a parent, you got to also calibrate the reality. If you didn't make your high school team, didn't make your sophomore team, then it's probably time to recalibrate and say, we're going to spend our time and resources on something else and, continue to find recreational opportunities where we can enjoy basketball, maybe continue to improve in our basketball ability because it's more fun when you're more skilled. But we're going to step away from that super high expectation of, making it on the varsity team and making it to be a college player. Chapter 3, we talk about limitation equals focus. We kick off that chapter talking about Parkinson's law, which says that work expands to fill the time available for its completion. And it's really more generalizable to say that any resource will expand to fill the availability for it. And so, if you have a player that is using the whole court to practice and they're using no shot clock, no time limitation, they're using all the time in the world, all the space in the world, and all the options to use any skill in the world, they're going to be very efficient. They're going to kind of bumble through, use a lot of things that were not necessary. They're going to use 4 crossovers when one could have done the trick, and they're not going to accelerate their learning very quickly. And if we flip that over and use limitations that we talk about in this chapter, the limitations of options, limitations of space, and the limitations of time. And all these are part of our confidence formula program that we go through with players, where in week 7, we talk about the advantage multiplier of trying to leverage the impact of every second of your practice by using those kind of limitations, setting a shot clock for yourself, giving yourself a countdown buzzer for every shot you're taking, giving yourself limited space to play one-on-one against your dad or your teammate or your brother or your dog, and giving yourself limited options. So you're not having to evaluate everything under the sun. When you catch a pass, you are simplifying to shoot it or drive it so that you can make that decision more quickly. And this is a big area that I think everybody can improve, from players individually to parents helping their player work out in the driveway to coaches that are running teams and camps and clinics and any kind of basketball activity. If we can use those 3 parameters of limitations, we can generate a lot better practice quality, a lot better transfer to actual game situations by narrowing that focus and improving the skills within a narrow scope. And then kind of tied to that part of the chapter, we talk about decision making and what we've come to call binary decisions. I've actually started calling it 2 moves and a cue. when I'm trying to relate it to someone for the first time. And basically, we're trying to narrow our options to only two. So I have a shot, I have a drive, and then they're a default and a counter move rather than two equal options, right? Even two equal options, I got to glance back and forth, try to evaluate both, and eventually decide. If I have a default, I'm shooting every time I catch a pass in range, then it's a lot easier to make that decision because the third part, the cue, is what is based on a defender normally. In that closeout situation, if the defender's hand is up, then I know I'm driving, and I don't have to look if the defender's hand is down because my default move is shooting. I'm shooting every time. If my defender's hand is up, so I can't shoot, I drive. And that dramatically accelerates our ability to make decisions very quickly and very accurately by, again, having only two options and only one cue, one trigger that we need to see in order to activate the counter move. So that's an area that I'm really interested in exploring and continuing to innovate in. I actually had a chance to speak at a conference this summer to a large group of behaviorists that are working in any field from autistic children to dog training and training dog owners to train their dogs better. And I was able to talk about decision trees and how we can stack those two options in one decision at a time. We can stack those decisions and have multiple layers. So we get into this with our players as well, building a decision tree out of two moves in a queue. My two moves split into two more moves, split into two more moves, but I'm only ever making a decision between two options at a time. And that can branch out to, hundreds and thousands of decisions based on multiple different situations in basketball. But typically we're going to have 3 or 4 decision points on our way to a scoring opportunity, right? From the time we catch a pass to the time we get to the basket, we've usually made 3 or 4 reactions to how the defense or how our teammates were reacting and moving with us. So questions we got out of this chapter. Again, the title of the chapter was Limitation Equals Focus. Questions number 1 was, how can we leverage the idea of limitations at home? And so I mentioned a couple things a minute ago about this, but one of the biggest things that I see is the lack of using time as a limitation. So, kids will be out shooting around the driveway. They're counting it as, I practiced an hour this week because I threw the ball up and, shuffled after it in my flip-flops or my sliders out in the driveway. And I got an hour practice in. But, if they could take that hour and instead do only 10% as much time, do 6 minutes where they had a shot clock, where a parent was counting it down, or the player was counting it down out loud in their head, or they had some kind of electronic device with a buzzer on it that they could actually work on buzzer beater shots, right? You get the ball, you got 2 seconds to get past your defender, get to the rim, or buzzer sounding, or you got 5 seconds to maybe cross over, beat 2 imaginary defenders, and then hit a jump shot. You can have really unlimited ability to create different scenarios to practice out of. But all of that time pressure really narrows your focus again toward what we want to really leverage that practice time. And then the second question we had about this was about the binary decisions. Parent asked, how can we implement the framework of binary decisions at home? And what we end up talking with our players about with this is using mental practice, where they're closing their eyes and visualizing a situation. And, practicing decisions against live defense is great. If you have a one-on-one defender, you can maybe go half speed and walk through, option 1, option 2, defender's doing this, therefore option 2. But, it's very hard to create the whole context of what's going to be happening in 5-on-5 basketball. Even for me with a group of 10 players, if I wanted to focus on one player making a decision in a certain scenario, it'd be very hard for me to control the other 9 players exactly the way we would need to in order to set up the situation. So mental practice is a really great leverage tool, again, where a player can, assuming they have about 2 years of experience, they can close their eyes and probably visualize 8 to 10 different game scenarios, either just memory, replaying what happened in a game, or imagining what could happen in a game situation wise. And they can start to mentally practice decisions, right? They can start to get good at identifying, okay, my defender's here, my teammate's there, I'm getting the ball from this direction on a pass, and here's my two options. Here's my cue that I'm looking at. They can start to develop a lot of expertise with decision making just off of mental practice. And again, one of the biggest leverages about that is they can do it anytime. I recommend they do it, on the bus to and from a game, at home, at night as they're falling asleep in bed. Like, they can do mental practice of a lot of different things. There's actually a couple of studies out there about this and the actual transference to physical performance. One of the most famous ones was about free throw shooting, where they had two groups of college players that they split as a control and a test group. The control group shot free throws every day like they normally would on a court with a ball for 2 weeks. The other group went to a designated dark room with no basketball, no court space, and no lights on even. And so they were closing their eyes and mentally practicing how they would shoot free throws. And they found that the more experienced players, the more refined their awareness was of what their free throw routine actually looked like in a normal basketball scenario. The more experience they had, the better improvement they made. And at the end, they took both groups and tested them, and they had both improved by the same amount. One group having practiced on the court for 2 weeks every day, the other group having done mental practice for 2 weeks, never touched a ball during that period in a free throw scenario. And really great evidence for how precisely that can transfer to game situations. So again, one of the best ways to implement that binary decision framework, start practicing that, is to use mental practice with your eyes closed. All right, chapter 4 is about negative space. So we kick off this one with another analogy about drawing an egg with the negative space dots approach. So if you've ever done a piece of artwork where you're tapping the paper with your pen to make dots, it can take a long time. A lot of dots are necessary to start to create even an outline of a shape. So we put down the egg shape and its shadow. If you were to create that with just those pen dots, it would take you an eternity. It would be thousands of dots in order to get any kind of clarity of an image to actually say that was an egg. And we're relating that to how most coaches are giving instructions, which is usually very vague and then quickly very negative and very critical, right? So it's like, our example in the chapter was shoot a layup as our total instructions, right? And so coach has some image in their head of what they want the layup to look like, and the player has probably a completely different image. And so they're going off to go attack and shoot a layup. And, they don't know why, they don't have a situation in mind, like all the things we just talked about with context. And so, they're just going to try their best. This is what a layup looks like to me. And they're quickly, hit on by the coach to say, don't jump off of that foot, jump off your other foot, use your other hand, use your right hand on the right side. That was a travel. Come on and finish, right? Coaches just yell finish. And I've seen parents kind of get on board with that too. Like during games, they'll just yell the word finish louder. The louder you yell it, the more they'll make their finishes, hopefully. And all of that is really just a waste of hot air in my mind. So what we want to get to is more specific instructions, and ideally instructions that we can say with certainty a yes if they do it correctly, and say nothing if they do it incorrectly. So this comes out of the tag teach approach, where we're trying to set up our instructions in multiple layers. They call the focus funnel. We're giving them kind of top layer, here's the situation, the instructions, we're going to do a crossover and an attack dribble to get to our layup. And then we come out with the tag point, which is said in 5 words or less, to really narrow their focus and say with certainty, we are getting our right knee up as we shoot our right hand layup. And that's our focus. We don't care what else happens. If we see the knee above the hip, we call that our threshold, and we say yes when we see him do it. And that feeds into our second part of this chapter, which is about precision feedback. And like I just described, if we set up our instructions very precisely, then when they do it correctly, all we have to say is yes for them to know that they've done it. And by using that system, we're really tying together a lot of very deep deeply ingrained learning processes in the brain by giving them the verbal confirmation as they are feeling it while they execute it. We're kind of hitting the auditory, visual, and kinesthetic systems all at the same time. The visual would have been from seeing a coach demonstrate it, hopefully, the same time. And then we also use film feedback to kind of reinforce that later with another visual aspect. If they can watch themselves on film, we usually try to contrast it, show them doing it incorrectly, show them doing it correctly, and they can kind of re-enter that body experience while they're watching it on film, like, oh, I remember what that felt like, and now I'm seeing it, and really has amazing impact on getting it to stick, which is always a problem for coaches. We feel like we're saying the same thing every time, thousands of times, over and over again. Players forget it, and they slip back to their old habits very quickly. But using this method, if we get so precise, so specific with our instructions, and so precise with our feedback, we're doing it at the instant of execution, then we find a lot better transference, a lot better sticking quality of that skill. Staying with the player in the same way, them coming back the next week and executing it correctly as we had practiced it is always a big win for me. So questions we got out of this chapter. One was, how do you balance the positive approach of, we like to say, unlimited attempts while with high expectations? How do we balance that high expectations while staying positive? What most coaches quickly fall into, whether from examples they've had in the past or just what's kind of a natural instinct even as a parent, is if you are coaching someone, they're doing it incorrectly and you want them to be better, right? You're coming at it from a very positive mindset, like, I want to help my son or daughter improve, therefore I'm going to tell them when they do it wrong so they know they did it wrong, and therefore they're going to take that feedback and hopefully improve. But what we try to do is take the positive approach, and it's really built on what we just described with the tag teach method. If we have our instructions very specific and we're always saying it in the positive, right? We're telling them what to do, we're not telling them what not to do. And so it kind of removes a whole half of the normal talking that has to take place on the court. We're able to get less talk and more action by saying only the desired behavior and only yes when they do it correctly. If they do it incorrectly, we just say, try it again. Maybe you repeat that instruction. And if they fail 3 times, then we'll change it and say, all right, we need a smaller piece of that skill, or we need to say our instruction a different way, because clearly they didn't get it yet. And if we can get more specific, then we're able to have a very high expectation. High expectations with unlimited attempts is kind of the winning combination there. So we can stay very positive, like, you are going to win, you are going to learn this, like, we have absolute certainty that you're going to be able to do this, and we have a very high expectation for you. Like, this is a very complex advanced skill. Here are the level 1 steps we're going to work on. We know you're going to get to level 10, but we're confident that you're going to step 1, 2, 3 all the way up to 10 by just having very small chunks of skills broken down very specifically. And then another question that we had from a parent is, don't players need motivation from coaches? And kind of combo, we combine a couple of questions here. Do coaches need to knock players down a peg in order for them to have the humility, I guess, to keep learning, was kind of what the question was getting at. And from my mindset, no, like, they don't need coaches to motivate them. If coaches are laying out logically, this connects to our situational context and our aspirational context, and we're giving you all the specific pieces you need to build that skill up to meet both of those, then players are very motivated, right? If we show them how their decision making can affect their performance in games, they're going to want to go work on decision making and practice that way. If we can show them a very specific technique of how they can make their layups go in the basket more often, they're going to be very motivated to work on that and apply it in games and apply it in some one-on-one practice so they can get good at it and start applying that specifically in the game situation where it needs to fit. And I've never found a need to motivate players. Going back to our limitations I always look at coaches that are yelling at players to hustle, and I just kind of hold my head in my hands, where I just want to implement a shot clock. Like, everybody hustles when there's a buzzer beater to be had, and nothing else is really needed. If we set a time limit that's achievable, and maybe we start to move that to a shorter time limit over time to really drive their progress. But there's no need to yell at players to hustle. There's no need to yell at players to try and motivate them. Certainly no need to knock players down a peg or demean them. If you have that, again, positive approach with unlimited attempts and really high expectations, like, most players are going to strive to meet the expectations that you have for them. Chapter 5, principles versus patterns. Probably my favorite chapter, because it's just one of the biggest cultural problems I see in all of basketball, where we're really, either due to just the constraints of time or the lack of trust in players themselves, like, coaches default to pattern memorization, right? We're going to design this ideal offense in our cloud of idealistic expectations. This is what perfect offense looks like. So we're going to drill our players, 45 minutes out of every practice is going to be spent on getting our plays to run correctly, usually with no defense in front of them. And so we're really relying on, kind of the simple and easy method of getting players to operate and coordinate as a team, which is pattern memorization. All humans are good at pattern memorization. You can draw it out on a whiteboard. It looks good when the players are running it, again, with no defense, and it's easier for the coach. He feels a sense of control, sense of peace, that there's not too much chaos, and players are doing what he expects of them. And over time, like we've just seen over the last 50 to 60 years of basketball, that when players are only taught how to run pattern plays, they are completely shut down. When they run into any new situation, pressure situation, they fall apart, because they have not had the chance to adapt and improvise and use different pieces of skills that they've learned to overcome a specific situation. And we often talk about kind of the two ends of the spectrum of practice that are often accomplished. We do stationary drills, where we're working on skills, like coaches are looking at it as, we're tackling our fundamental skills over here, but we're doing it stationarily with no defense to react to, and it's incredibly boring and doesn't translate to games. And then we're doing our 5-on-5 or 5-on-0 pattern memorization practice, where we're running this scripted pattern where the player sees, I go from A to B to C to D, throw this pass, run over here, set the screen, run over there, and my job's done. And what is missing is that entire center piece of the spectrum of basketball, where most of the action actually takes place, where it's a skill that's on the move, it's not stationary, and it's reacting to a defender and maybe a teammate instead of being in isolation. And we are creating improvisational adaptions to defense that's live in the moment, real-time reactions. We're very rarely able to run through our set pattern that we've memorized without running into some serious problems. And I always equate it to the difference in time investment. If you spend 45 minutes out of 20 practices to go master this beautiful designed play that you have, it only takes about 2 possessions for a defensive team to understand and break that play down, right? We're running pattern A, B, C, D, E, F, G to get a shot at H, and the defense sees it coming. When you call this play, they have seen you run it twice, and at B, they intercept the pass because it's scripted and they know where it's going, when it's going, and they run down and make a layup on the other end. And coaches get really frustrated about turnovers, and that's one of the biggest reasons that I see turnovers happening, is that they're very predictable. We're running set patterns, and again, humans are good at pattern memorization. It's a lot of work and a lot of time to get a perfectly timed offense running really well, and it doesn't take much for defense to catch on. They see the pattern run, they disrupt the pattern, and suddenly all that work is out the window, and we have to actually improvise, which is really what happens the most often in games. From the studies that I've seen done and been a part of doing, it's about 70% of the time where actual scoring takes place from improvisation. And so even if we had our set play set up, at some point, one of the players decided to go rogue and actually did the scoring. And most coaches, I would say, falsely attribute the scoring to the play, but the play was just there long enough for the player to find an opportunity and then go score. So again, tying this back to the principles as the counterpoint to that, we want to work on fundamental principles that apply to all situations universally as much as possible, so that when a player sees a situation, they have a toolkit that they can apply to it, and they can start to mix and match, and through experience start to refine what tools go where. And if we are using that sense of principles together with a shot clock or a time pressure, and having the ability to identify cues that they're going to react to, that's kind of the trifecta to really coordinate a team at a very high level. I often talk to players, relate to players on the difference between, a group of 5 guys that shows up to play pickup together that have never played together. They all have 5 different ideas about what should be happening, compared to, a team that's played together. Like the same 5 or 6 guys have played for, 3, 4, 5 seasons together. They're going to be dramatically different performance abilities, and really based on their ability to have what we call team cognition. We can really think about it as anticipation factors. But if the guys that have always played together know what their teammate's going to do, what his favorite move is, how he's going to react to certain situations, they can anticipate and really outperform anybody else. And it takes a long time. Like we're talking about 3 to 5 years of playing together to really get good like that. But again, the 3 aspects I just mentioned are really a shortcut to that. You could take any group of players, if you give them a shot clock, so they have no time delay ability, they're actually going to get better very quickly. If you give them principles like our drive and kick, one of my favorite, if our teammate drives right, we're moving to the right. And then if you give them cues, like we talked about in our closeout situation, defender's hand is up, I'm driving. I'm not going to shoot a contested shot over a defender's hand. And if we get those 3 aspects working together across our team, we're going to develop that really high level of coordination very quickly. And the last aspect that we talk about in the chapter 5 was the ability to evaluate coaches, right? If you walk into a practice and the coach is just drilling 5-on-0, or he's doing all stationary dribbling drills, then you can probably leave and go find a better program, because if they're not giving players the ability to make decisions and practice their ability to improvise, then your player is really going to be handicapped, right? If they're working on stationary dribbling and pattern memorization, and they're stuck in that team or that program for 2 or 3 seasons, they're probably not going to make it to play high school basketball. And so if you're looking for that as a clear sign of no go for that program, then you can probably avoid, a lot of pain and distress from your player. Find a program where they are actually encouraging players to make decisions and take action and improvise, on the fly. And so it's one of my key things that I'm working on for trying to educate parents. We actually have a program now called the Parent Impact Program, where we're working on 3 major things, but one of them is how to evaluate coaches and programs better, to make sure, at the tryout, it should be a mutual tryout. If the coaches don't know what they're doing and they're running practice, they're running their tryout in such a way that's not going to benefit your player, then you should go find a different program. All right, chapter 6. Actually, let me touch on questions here before I skip over that. Questions from number 5. One is, why do coaches default to pattern memorization? So kind of touched on that already, but again, I think it's kind of a default. It's what they were used to in most cases, and it's also kind of a shortcut to get a sense of control, right? If we know what's going to happen on the court as coaches, then we feel a lot better about coaching games. It's not as stressful for us. And trusting players to work out the kinks and develop an improvisational style of play is stressful. There's a lot of chaos going on. There's a lot of unknowns going on in the court as they work through and start to apply that. And then the second question was, what's the hardest part about teaching principles? And I think it may be related to what I just said of trusting that players are going to progress and eventually come out of it as better decision makers, better players. Because while you're teaching principles, trying to hold them accountable to operating on the principles consistently, there's going to be a lot of mistakes. There's going to be messy plays. You're probably going to lose a lot of games as you kind of get through that grind of working out all the different pieces that need to happen to make that really work. So I think trusting, it's kind of a cliche nowadays to say trust the process, but trusting the process of players going through that mess and coming out better on the other side is one of the hardest things about teaching a principled style of play, because it's very easy to say, hey, we lost 3 games, we had 20 something turnovers, and this is clearly not working. So let's go run our set play now. We're going to revert back to, what we know, what we can control, because, the mess is just too much to handle in a lot of ways. All right, chapter 6, private failure and public success. I think this is really a really big concept that not a lot of people really think about. From my experience in talking to parents and coaches, is that, if you're always under the eye of a coach or under the eye of your peers, you're going to have a certain sense of pressure to perform, and you're not going to be willing to try out new things. And, we've kind of changed over the last 30 years, I'll say, from having a lot of opportunities for free play. Pickup games in the park was very common even when I was a kid, 20, 25 years ago. And nowadays that just doesn't happen as much. Like, every game that players play is on a court with referees and a scoreboard. And so there's always that pressure to win. And it's usually with a coach, right? So we have the pressure from the coach to do what the coach said. We don't care about what our peers think of us in that coaching situation in a game. We want to please the coach so we have more playing time and we help win the game. And then in practice, we have a lot more pressure from peers in that we don't want to look goofy and mess up. So we're not going to try things. It's kind of 2 different tiers. Things we could try in practice could be a lot bigger spectrum than what we would try in games because of that pressure to perform and win. But even in practice, we're performing that in front of our peers. And, if you know any 11 to 13-year-old boys, they don't really have any problem with snickering very loudly when anybody trips over their own feet or travels or dribbles off their foot. And so what we found with one-on-one training is that it really provides that place for players to fail in private, right? We can get them 100 reps of a certain skill with nobody else seeing it except us, and they quickly develop that skill certainty, sense of concrete confidence. Like, I know that I know that I know how to do this, and now I'm okay trying it in front of my peers. And I'm probably even gonna try to break somebody's ankles with this new dribble move that they've never seen before because I've been working it in private. And I just think it's a really big aspect that needs to be addressed with every player right now. Because again, if they're only playing formal games and having formal practice time with coaches, they're not going to be willing to try stuff out. And, on the other side of that could be, the third tier is what they would do in their driveway by themselves with no one watching. And typically what I see there is that they might be trying out some complex things. They might be trying a lot of new stuff, but they don't really have the focus to direct that to what's actually helpful and applicable in a game. Right. So they could be doing a lot of nonsense, which is not all bad. Like, experimentation with, a wide spectrum of ability kind of helps you calibrate and form kind of the core of your skill set. But the most effective is to have a coach observing, so that, it's a coach with a very positive approach, again, that's giving that specific instruction and precise feedback. And so we're directing their attention to, this is what's important, and this is where you're failing at it. So we're going to work through that failure and get you to the point where you can go attempt it and have public success. And I think for the parents' role, I think it's really important that you try to provide some of that. And I think a big key to that is allowing the player to invite you to observe them, invite your critique or your advice on what they're doing. Too many parents are, overzealous to jump in and throw criticism, mostly because that's how coaching is modeled, right? We have a high expectation, and so we need to yell at you until you meet that high expectation. And learning just doesn't work that way. So I'd encourage you as a parent to provide them the space, get them a driveway hoop. You can buy one for $100 now at Walmart. Get a portable hoop in the driveway so they can start working at their game and practicing on their own, and have that widest spectrum of anything under the sun that they could work on. And then rebound for them, throw them passes, be involved, but hold back your criticism, your critique, until it's invited. And if you're there a lot, they will find something that they can't quite figure out on their own. They don't know if they're doing it right or how it looks, and they will say, hey, can you watch me do this and tell me if I'm doing it right? Maybe they'll have you watch the YouTube video that they're working on this skill from, say, watch this and then watch me, and can you tell me if I'm doing it right? And if you're patient enough to wait for that, then you kind of have opt-in from them. And then anything else that you see and want to give them perspective on, they're going to be a lot more open to receiving that. So one reason we have a business is that a lot of parents come to us and say, my player's not listening to me anymore. And it usually happens because that parent has been chirping unsolicited advice at them their whole life, and they kind of know what their parent's going to say before they say it. And they also don't see the parent as an expert that's credible advice. And so if they're if it's unsolicited and uncredible, then they're going to just tune you out. And so we experience that a lot. Parents will come and say they just need a different voice. They need to hear, I know I've been saying good advice, but they're not listening. They need, we need you, Coach BJ, to say the same advice, and they're going to be more open to it. And sometimes that is the case. And so, going back to our parent impact program, another aspect of that is, how can you design practice for your player, and how can you have objective and credible advice to give them? So, evaluating performance objectively, so we can give them hard numbers and hard data on what they're doing in games, and then designing practice, based on that number. Ideally, hey, you shot only 20% from 3-point line. Let's go work on your shooting technique and 3-point shots this week in the driveway. And, if you have that approach, then suddenly you have some credibility. And if you tie that with the player asking for your input, then those two, credibility and asked for advice is always going to have a lot better impact, and really make a lot more positive relationship when you're trying to work with your players. Every parent wants to help, and not all players want that help, usually due to those two reasons. And the question we had here for chapter 6 was, how do I create the space for my player to invite my advice? And kind of related to what I just said, I think patience is really the key factor here. Just be present and be patient, right? Get out there when they go out to shoot in the driveway, go out and rebound for them, throw them passes, be a dummy defender for them. Just be on the court. You don't have to coach them. You don't have to critique them. You can be a player with them if you want to, and you've got some athletic ability, you want to go at it. Be a good defender. Go at it, get the ball in your hands, see if you can get by them. All that stuff is really enjoyable to players that are in the age group that we're working with. 10 to 14-year-olds love that interaction with parents, especially if they've developed some skill and can actually beat you as a parent. That is a big confidence boost. And then if you're there and involved in a kind of peer relationship, right? If you're not jumping in as the coach and trying to critique and advise, then they're going to be a lot more open to saying, hey, watch this move, tell me what you think my feet are doing. Is this a travel? It's a question that comes up a lot. Players are not quite sure how their feet are moving and if it is a travel or not. So again, my advice there would be present and be patient, and hopefully earn an invitation to start giving some advice and some critiques, and hopefully help them out. All right, chapter 7, the value of free play. Another big category we could probably write a whole nother book on. just how important free play is. And again, going back to what we talked about briefly a minute ago with the kind of lack of pickup games that are available, right? Players are always playing in that organized, formal sport environment. And so free play is just an incredible opportunity. And where, a lot of the best players, even in the NBA, always talk about how much they just got out to the park and played. And so I think nowadays it's kind of necessary for parents to initiate those kind of opportunities, right? It's very easy to just, sign up for a league, sign up for an AAU program, sign up for a camp. But I like the approach of, hey, I know 10 parents from my school. Let's get our sons together, once a week over the summer. And, we got this park down the street, or one parent has a hoop in their yard. Let's get them over there and just, let them play. And, maybe you can help them look up some rules about, how to play 3-on-3 half court basketball, and, get them accustomed to that, because most players are just not used to that kind of play anymore. And another recommendation I have related to that is specifically to the FIBA 3-on-3 rule book that's now being played in the Olympics. FIBA 3-on-3 has become a really big international competitive environment. And they've kind of formalized 3-on-3 play to what we used to do is just pickup games. And so, you could kind of get your group of kids and parents together and say, hey, let's operate based on this rule book, so we have some structure, and then let the kids do the self-directed play out of that. And it might be a little bit easier to get them started, because it feels like, right, it's official. It's not going to be, the best kid's going to make the rules and blow everybody off if they say he traveled or he fouled somebody. It kind of provides some accountability. And the other aspect we talk about briefly in the book with this is that it really gives players an ability and an experience of negotiating things. If we have a problem where one player thinks it was definitely out of bounds, the other player thinks it's not, like the traditional tiebreaker is to shoot for it, right? One player shoots a free throw. If he misses, then the other player gets to shoot. And if he makes it, then whatever his opinion was on the play is the one that wins the ball, the possession. And there's a lot of that, freestyle negotiation stuff that just doesn't happen in a lot of other scenarios, other social scenarios with players. Again, if it's always formal game where the referee is the one to make the call, or it's a coach in practice and he's the one to say, whether it was out of bounds or not, or whether this player should have taken that shot or not. Like having the peer-to-peer interaction, negotiation, and even accountability in a lot of ways, I think is really positive. There's an upper limit to how much of a goofball you can be in a pickup game with your friends if they want to win and your goofballness is causing you to lose, right? So it doesn't always take the adults, the coach, the parent, to have that level of accountability. Like if our goal is to play basketball that's fun and try to compete and win, then the peer equality will eventually come out and say, hey, Jack, stop shooting crazy 3-point step backs. You're airballing every time. We got to try and win this game. And I think there's really a lot of positive aspects that can come out of that free play. So a question we get a lot is, how can I facilitate free play? And so again, my advice is, find parents in your PTA group, find parents in your church, find neighbors down the street and say, hey, I'm going to host on my little $100 hoop in our driveway, like every Saturday at, kids are sleeping in late. So every Saturday, 11 a.m., we're going to come over and play some 3-on-3. Maybe I'll get a whistle and referee it if the kids want that and need that to start out with, but eventually they'll kind of calibrate to their own in-house rules and how they want to play it. And I think you can get a lot of really positive benefits out of that in a lot of different ways. And hopefully, kind of fill in that center piece of the spectrum again between the stationary skills, if that's what they're getting practice, and the pattern memorization that they're running with their team. Like the 3-on-3 really fits that mold for how we can start to calibrate and figure out trial and error style how to play improvisational basketball that's really going to help your player have a better comfort level and have a better, easier time of progressing more quickly and executing at a higher level when they play games. So that's the end of the list of my questions. I guess just to summarize the some of the main takeaways for the book in general. Hopefully, you guys can give me feedback on what you've taken away from the book. I'd love to hear some more questions as a follow-up to this call, and some more insights on what really stuck out to you. Again, we're headed into creating the second edition of the book, and so I'm trying to pack in all the revisions, all the additions possible to really ramp that up for round 2 and make it even more valuable to the next set of parents that's going to read it. So to summarize, getting parents comfortable with the 3 parts of our parent impact program are really 3 things that came out right in this book and talking to parents afterwards. So again, one is how to evaluate coaches and programs, right? How can you get better at the eye test of, hey, are they running an effective practice? Are they only doing stationary and pattern memorization? Like, can I take a tryout of an hour and evaluate a coach and say, hey, I don't think this is a good fit based on what I just saw? And then pillar number 2 of the parent impact program is the objective evaluation of performance. So watching games, can I evaluate statistically what happened? Can I make some notes about what I'm seeing from my player in games and bring that to them and kind of provide that credibility where they can see, I'm actually pretty knowledgeable about basketball. I'm actually taking notes and, making a real effort to try to provide them valuable info instead of just saying, usually 2 ends of the spectrum. It's like, yay, Johnny, you did great, even though he felt like he played terrible and lost the game. Or, Johnny, you really got to work on your free throw and getting your arm up higher. Got to get higher arc on your shot, and just got to get higher arc on your shot. If that's all I ever hear from you, taking that critical kind of coaching approach as a parent, like, they're going to tune out both of those eventually. If you have objective, realistic, credible information to provide them, then it's going to really help them take your advice more seriously. And then the third pillar of the parent impact program is how to design practice at home. How can you use those limitations we talked about, limiting their options, limiting their time, limiting their space, and working on their binary decisions? How can you use all of that to help design better practices for their home? So they're not just, counting an hour of standing around the driveway, shooting the ball up any which way and, walking after it and shooting it again. How can we leverage the impact of all those minutes of practice? That's really the name of the game. If we're looking at every player from age 8 to 14 that wants to play high school basketball, like, all of them are going to play a certain amount of competitive leagues, practices, games, everything. They're going to have a certain number of hours that they're in the court. And really where we can have the biggest impact is finding the small levers that move mountains, right? Decision making, having better effectiveness in practice when you're at home, and finding programs where they're going to actually be allowed to get the ball in their hands, make decisions, and start to develop their own ability to improvise and adapt in the chaos of live basketball. So I really enjoyed the list of questions we got. I enjoyed going through the book again with you guys. Hope you got a lot out of this. And again, please follow up with any other questions and any feedback for me. I'd really love to hear from you and to tie all that together into our second edition of the Confidence Puzzle book. Thank you.